Draft physics video presentation. Yes, this will be a Ken Wheeler video. Sorry, but his last video was just so preposterous. 20 minutes and he didn't say a thing. I mean, there really wasn't. Well, he said things, but I mean, he said things like, there's no ether, there's an ether, the ether isn't something, the ether is nothing, the ether is something, there's an electric field, there's a magnetic field, but those aren't fields because they aren't the ether. I don't know. Oh yeah, so we'll play it just because what the hell. So I just wanted to contrast it, whatever this mumbo jumbo that Ken talks about, to the simple argument I would make, and then I'll also point out what conventional physics does to this, and how it's wrong, but it's not nearly as wrong as Ken. So, yeah. So anyway, the idea is that there's two things in the universe. The stuff that's moving, the heavy stuff, big stuff, matter, stuff made of electrons and protons, and neutrons. Neutrons made of electrons, protons, but never mind. So the stuff that doesn't move innately, and then the rest of it is all the stuff going the speed of light. So gravity, magnetism, light, and the atomic forces, strong and weak, are basically understood to be moving the speed of light. They're not instantaneous forces. They don't go from point A to point B instantaneously. It takes time to get there. And they all take the same amount of time, which I sort of argue is sort of an indication of something, like they have something in common. So anyway, and so I think just by creating a polarization idea, we already know that the proton and the electron are oppositely charged, and so if we just think of the force as also having the same, if matter can have a red and black or a plus and minus, then why can't the field energy have the same kind of prejudice? And using a model that basically concedes that point, you can explain gravity, magnetism, light, and the strong nuclear force is all one force. And the only difference is that in the case of gravity, it's a mixed force. It's not of a consistent frequency. It's not in any way shaped. It's what the universe creates. So it's chaos. So it's all the colors of light mixed together. It's all the everything. And in that form, you can only measure it by measuring this, by measuring how it moves electrons and protons. And that's it. There's no other way to measure it that we know of, except the way it makes things move. And that's the only thing. Alright, otherwise invisible, so to speak. And then you have magnetism, which you're all familiar. Turn them the right way, the poles the right way, and it becomes strongly propulsive. Turn it the other way, strongly attractive. And I would argue that the attraction is just the absence of the repulsion force in between. So you're basically just lowering the pressure between the magnets, and the external pressure pushes them together. Increase the pressure between them, that is, create a circumstance where the little force bits can't enter either magnet. They have to bounce back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. The closer you bring them together, the more impacts that is, the more pressure to move back out again, and that's your repulsive force. So just simply polarizing the force. So it doesn't have a frequency, but it's polarized. So it's gravity filtered, and I've called magnets just filters. They don't create any force. They don't make anything. They don't create any bits of anything. They don't manufacture anything. They're just a kind of filter paper, okay, where red goes this way and black goes that way, and as a consequence of that segregation, it becomes a force filter, and the force is magnified, magnetism, by that process. Light is the electron force, but so it's black, and it's always light is it's just the force at a frequency. So the corpuscles of the force, the essence of the force, whatever the force is, the bit of force, it clearly has a frequency. So waves is one way of saying up and down or on and off. Yes, there's something here. No, there's nothing here. That's one way to draw that very fact. I could say these three things are things in space, but you can draw them or represent them on a chart as, yes, there's a lot of stuff here, no stuff here, a lot of stuff here, no stuff here. You can make it into a wave, but it's not really waving. And I would argue light's not really waving, it's just at a frequency. And it's the electron force. That's why we detect it based on how it affects electrons. It doesn't fundamentally interact with a proton. And the strong nuclear force is just, as I've drawn on the website and other places many times, is just the very nature of the mechanism. The red force affects the protons in a specific way, the black force or the electron force affects the electrons in a specific way, and those two ways are exactly opposite, therefore magnifying the effects between them. And with the nuclear forces, there's no inverse square law because the force isn't spreading in a bunch of directions. It's very direct between two objects. The balls bounce between the two paddles. They don't go all over the universe. Alright, so that's the brief. You can unify all of physics, you can unify all the forces, you don't need to create extra dimensions, you don't have to create dualities, you don't have to make anything complicated. You can just concede that there's bits moving the speed of light, all the force bits are moving the same speed, the speed of force, and then there's matter bits, and the matter bits are hit by the force and move according to how much force has hit them. And it's pretty much that simple. Okay, so on to Ken. I have to switch to the video, of course. Hopefully this is what that does, and it did do that. Amazing. Technology. It's working. Okay.
Accountant is given a job to give a analysis of something that has no quantification or parameter.
Right, so his argument is we can't quantify. Quantifying is a bad thing. Somehow that's the big crime of physics or science, is to quantify, to gain statistics or to recognize patterns. I mean, it's the basic function of our brain, essentially, is to do this pattern recognition, to associate Abominable Snowman with Sasquatch or something, to see similarities in things and recognize the similarities have meaning or substance. And so, although he's just being rhetorical and trying to insult this idea of having a kind of a logical, solid things are solid, non-solid things aren't solid. I mean, he just seems like this idea that we recognize the difference between a matter thing sitting in space and a the absence of matter, and would just make the logical conclusion this is sort of the on state and the nothing is the off state. This is somehow being materialistic and obnoxious to our true essence, which is some sort of sparkly star essence. We're all star sparkles or something. Some kind of, there's some kind of crap in here that makes him obnoxious to this conversation about the very thing that, and then his heroes were exactly these kind of people. So he spent the first 2 minutes of the video insulting mathematicians, or the approach of being methodical and corpuscular, looking for the essence, taking things apart, reducing them to pieces, recognizing how the pieces function. And it's one of his heroes, Steinmetz, who he mentions in this video, was purely a mathematician. His value to General Electric, or I think it was General Electric, was the very fact that he did the math. Yeah. But whatever. I might have been Westinghouse. I think he started General, but it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter to me. I mean, obviously it matters to Steinmetz. I mean, he probably doesn't want to be associated with the bad guys or something. But anyway, whatever.
They, of course, would pull their hair out and immediately commit suicide. This is what a modern scientist is. They're not actually scientists. And I'm not against math at all, but they're mathematicians. And these people have tried to quantify everything, but a field has no quantity. It cannot be quantified. Everything.
All right. Well, he says there's no fields, and so again, he just keeps going back and forth. There's fields, then there's no fields. There's fields, there's no fields. I think what he means to say is there's only one field, and it's called ether, the AFer. So the AFer is the one field, and all the perturbations, all the things that happen in that field, we're calling something like magnetism or light or gravity or nuclear forces. Something like that.
As fields, and fields are not particles. We first have to dismiss.
So again, this whole argument about arguing what a particle is and what you could describe it as, I mean, a ton of the evidence that Ken doesn't want to bother accounting for kind of indicates that whether it's a particle or not, it comes in a very discrete form, very tiny, and it has a very, very much fundamental nature that seems to be it's in places at particular times, and it lands just like a particle would, in the sense that its impact is very small and it has it in a complete way. It doesn't it doesn't do the half thing. It does the I hit you entirely or I didn't hit you, but it doesn't do something in between, and it certainly isn't spreading. So it's not doing traditional wave things.
Miss the cult of scientism, or what I call it, the cult of bumping particles. It is specifically nihilistic and atomistic.
Alright, so I don't know why he throws this nihilistic and atomistic. Yes, well, whatever. Yes, people logically can conclude with, being very fair to the evidence that it looks that way. It looks like when you look at the big universe, it looks atomistic. Little Mercury, big giant Saturn, Jupiter. There's all kinds of the little dust inside of the rings of Saturn. We can look at it and it looks very atomistic. It looks like the big bits are made out of smaller bits, alright, and that their work and function under very strict rules based on their mass and their velocity and momentum and very strict confines. They don't do anything magical. Maybe this is a good time to just, I don't know how much of this I'll play. I mean, it's all the same thing over and over again. He starts with his big words and it's just, it doesn't go anywhere at all. So I don't know how much value you're going to get out of this anyway. But I just thought for contrast. So let's try to understand the traditional model, alright, which basically says, okay, you have, let's just make a mark for the thing. So this is gravity, and they got light, and they got magnetism, and they got the nuclear stuff. Alright, so for light they're saying this is electric and magnetic. So they also have another field in here called the electric field or force. So they think there's an electric force when I've argued that the electric force is just a consequence of the magnetic force. You move electrons with magnetism, and when you move them you call it electricity. So anyway, so these are like fields, okay, like ethers. You could say these are all the different ethers they think exist. And so light isn't a field, so it's a combination of the magnetic and the electric are somehow doing their vibration-y thing, the two fields, to create a photon. So it's some sort of thing that travels like it was just a little blob at a distance, but they think it's a wavy thing in two fields. And gravity is pretty much a field, space-time, that you can contract. So you don't wave it, but you contract it. You pull it in. It loses thickness or something. You suck it in, and somehow the stuff has to move because you move the water around it. So everything's floating in the bent space water, and when you pull the water out, the stuff has to be dragged along when you pull its what it's floating on. And the nuclear force is a big it's just what you call virtual photons. So that's sort of what they do with the magnetic field when it comes to using the magnetic field as something other than what light travels through. So when light isn't traveling through the magnetic field, it turns into something much more corpuscular, much more little bits, because they come up with this idea of the virtual photon, the not a real photon, some sort of fake little bit of energy that is being transferred between magnets, and they have to call it virtual because they don't have any accounting for where it came from. So in contrast to my theory, where I'm explaining how the magnet is really just filtering the gravity force. It's a force already that exists, that does everything, and you're just changing its configuration. So it's the same force, it's just now polarized by the magnet, segregated, filtered, and therefore made stronger. Alright, so now there's lots to complain about with this conventional theory, because the gravity model, of bending space and creating a contraction doesn't really fit with any of the other field modalities. These other fields don't look anything like the gravity one. They're all full of this wave stuff. It's very big on things waving. So they say wave in a field, and what Ken is saying is perturbation, whatever the perturbation is. And he's actually drawn it like this. He'll draw the wave and he'll say this is the node, and then this is the node, and then this is the node. And so somehow he's saying this stuff isn't so important, it's this node that's important. And the nodes end up looking just like particles anyway. But whatever, it's impossible to I can't draw a great diagram of either one's theories, because neither one of their theories gives any of this stuff any reality. And certainly a virtual photon, I can't really give you an illustration of what they think it's doing. They just think there has to be an energy transfer, because they kind of know the magnet's doing something when it's moving across the conductor to move the electron. So they know a force has to be communicating, and they know it's moving at a speed, which makes it more obvious that it's a force, because something that wasn't a force wouldn't need to go so slowly, if you know what I mean. Why is it taking time? But they think of it as a wave in the field. So there's two inconsistencies. First, their gravity thing doesn't really match their light thing in terms of the waving in two different fields versus the contraction of a field. And then their magnetism model doesn't really match their light model, because they really don't think of it as waves of something. They think of it as energy moving in straight lines, and it just doesn't have any. There's no argument that it's electromagnetic virtual photons. But anyway, because obviously you can't explain magnetism with a redundant force. You're trying to explain the force of magnetism. You can't use the force of magnetism to explain the force of magnetism, if you get what I mean. You can't rely on a thing that needs the field to function to explain the origin of the field. But anyway, they're just really not very compatible drawings, illustrations of force, in the sense that the only thing they have in common is the speed they move by their description. Alright, so that's probably enough of that. And then we'll attempt to draw something of Ken's, but there won't be any hope of doing that. I don't think there'll be any hope of doing it.
It denies any substrate to anything that does not have a Cartesian value. This cannot pass the muster or the filter of a modern-day scientist who is not a scientist at all, but a mathematician. A true scientist is interested in nature. Nature is both existential and it is noetic. These are two sides of the same coin. This is also.
So again, this just sounds like a minister preaching or something. I have to believe in the Holy Ghost because you say so. I mean, that nonsense just is, again, this whole idea that you're nihilistic because you believe in atomism, in the sense you believe things reduce to simpler mechanisms. So that's somehow being a nihilist, which is nonsense. Now, these other terms, I don't know exactly what they mean specifically, but again, I mean, these are philosophical accusations. So he's making the accusation that people who are involved in science are somehow not respecting nature enough, or they're somehow not being good detectives, and that they're not following the evidence enough, or some kind of nonsense like that. And I'm arguing the same thing about some of their behavior is, I think, very bandwagon. They're jumping way ahead of their evidence. They don't have anything to defend what they're doing. but Ken's in the same position. He doesn't provide any evidence for his dogma. He just tells me the Holy Ghost exists, but he doesn't really draw me a picture of it.
So the antinomies of human existence that the Greeks so accurately and well defined.
So this whole idea of keep resorting to history or something like we needed the Greeks to figure out how to think. Now, no, we would have done that. We would have thought about how to think, and we would have analyzed the thinking. We'd realize that sometimes we can be fooled, things can happen, and it can look really weird, but we're just being fooled. Like trees could grow crooked because the ground, there was an earthquake, 20 years ago, and the ground tilted, so the trees all grew crooked. All kinds of things can happen that can fool you, and so you have to be a little bit careful. But that's all thinking is. It's just making observations and being fair to the observations. This idea that I need an ancient Greek guy to tell me how to think is again just more why?
Of the ignorances of human beings. On the one side, you have a nihilist. On the other side, you actually have a creationist. You have two sides of the flip coin that can never see.
Right, and what does this have to do with anything? So he's accusing conventional science of being nihilistic, which I don't think they're any more nihilistic than the rubes or boobs who don't do science, so that doesn't make any sense. I mean, the trailer park trash who doesn't spend any time giving a shit about how the physical universe works. I don't think they're more decent, loving, caring, whatever, civilized human beings than the nihilist scientist.
See the center of anything, but specifically regarding field theory, most people don't.
So when he says field theory, he really means unfield theory. Again, he should just say regarding ether theory. Why does he play this game? He 1 minute says there's no fields, and the next minute he'll talk about the electric field or the magnetic field. So what's the point?
Understand, and they're going to think, you are going to think, that this is a distinction without a difference, but a magnet does not have a field around it. A magnet does not have a field, and of course, well, sure.
So, he thinks it has a hyperboloid of perturbations in ether. Now, I really, it is kind of hard to say. How do you, and it's it's a moving field. So let's draw his interpretation in his, a quick drawing. I'm not going to be, I'm not going to add every detail. But the idea is that he thinks a magnet is doing this thing. There's a tornado going down, and then the opposite tornado going out, and then there's this thing going all the way around. So around the whole magnet there's this other swirly bit of hyperboloid, and this is all active stuff. So there's lots of arrows here, lots of movement. This is all moving stuff. It's all moving perturbations in the ether. This stuff's going. Lots of going. Now, this doesn't explain how you turn a magnet reverse that somehow they attract, and it doesn't, there's no dynamic to this. The best they could do is slowly move into each other or slowly move away from each other, but it's not going to create any kind of very, very strong attraction. But anyway, whatever this is, this stuff, it either you call it a field, that is, it's either stuff that the magnet actually produces. Now, there's no evidence the magnet gets lighter that it's producing something, so you have to say there's a field or there's an ether or there's something. You have to give it some sort of, you have to say there's something that this stuff is jiggling, and that all this movement is a kind of wave, in the sense that it's perturbations, it's dominoes flipping that were already in the field, because the magnet can't create the dominoes. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say there's nothing and then there's something that the waves are moving through. You can't. You have to have a medium of some kind. You can't say the ether is nothing and then say something travels through the nothing, but nobody has to create the something. Or what? It's double nothing. I don't know. Well, anyway, yeah. There's just no hope. Switch screens and play.
Does. I mean, if I get a piece of ferrous material close to it, it will accelerate towards that, or magnets quote-unquote repel, or they attract. But it's not a locus in or to or of the magnet. As said,
it's not a locus of or in or to the magnet. I mean, what is this? The magnet either is causing the effect or it's not. But I mean, just what are you saying?
The devil is in the details.
Yeah, and you have none of those. So yes, we're way out of luck.
And the devil is, regarding specifically magnetic objects, with the Cartesian parameter, say 1 inch by 1 inch neodymium iron.
Yes, the magnets matters. It matters how massive they are, and then it matters on how they're configured inside, in the sense of how much magnetism as a percentage of their mass, how much of their mass has been magnetized. So how strong their N value. And so their N value times their mass will give you a strength of the magnet.
Boron. There is no field around that magnet. It is a pressure mediation disturbance of the aether.
Okay, so there you go. A pressure mediation disturbance in the ether. So let's just pretend. Let's just say, okay, there's one field. It's called ether. Why confuse the issue? You're just saying instead of electromagnetic fields and instead of gravity field, bent spacey thing, whatever it is, there's one thing called the ether, and that this magnetism phenomenon is a disturbance in this medium. That is, it's like a sound wave. It's traveling through, except it's doing it in some coaxial manner, where the little sound just moves in straight little chunks, like particles.
There is not a field or something. There is no substance of a field, obviously so. But once again, I know you're going to think that this is a distinction without a difference, so if we actually interject a strong magnetic...
I want to say it's an incomprehensible gobbledygook to say it is something and then say it's not something. So it's just stupid. It either is or it is not.
Field in any particular place that will have a value that corresponds with the Maxwellian field equations of an effect over a period of time with a certain vector. We have talk about magnetic lines of force. Now, a line is a human conceptual abstraction.
Well, that's playing word games, semantics now. Okay, yeah, obviously. But what does the line represent? It does represent the strength of the force. So it's not incoherent to a real phenomenon. Now, you use it when it's to your advantage. You say these are lines of force when it's to your advantage. So you accept the existence of them when you can use them, and now you're pretending that there's something not valid about lines because humans invented it. The line represents intensity, and the real truth is the line really represents the strength of the rays coming out of the magnet. The thing that makes the field lines is really radians coming out of the charge of the magnet.
And force has no Cartesian reality. To say force is like saying a wave. When we say force, force of what? There's no such thing as a force, goddammit. Well, sure there is. No. A force is of something upon something else, or something as defined.
Yes, exactly. So light travels across the room, it impacts something, it imposes a force on the thing. It changes where the electron is positioned. Yes, it does.
extrinsically and by denotation rather than connotation as something that is extending outwards to the plane of rest or inertia or true potential or power. A magnet does not have a field. What a magnet does is it initiates both centrifugal divergence and centripetal convergence in line with the field coherency which defines a magnet as pertains
in line with field coherency that defines a magnet. So what he just said about that convergence and divergence, that's the loop-de-doo shit I just drew. And he keeps using this idea of, he says things like pressure mediation, which is a sensible word in my opinion, and he'll talk about coherency. And coherency, if you think about it, could be used as a way of saying that you're taking something that's mixed and you're unmixing it, which is essentially my model of filter. So these are almost useful terms, but in his pocket they're no good. You just can't make them into anything. They're got too hot in there.
To the parameter, and it's certainly not space, because space is not a thing, as Tesla so famously said, and accurately, as well as many others, including the ancient Greeks. Space has absolutely no goddamn property.
Yes, well, that really wasn't the point. In defining space-time, look, it's a play on words. Nobody was arguing that nothing is doing something. The argument is there's some structure consistent with space that's just as deep as space, just as flat as space, just as everywhere as space, that contains this geometric information of some sort that creates a contraction in that geometry that protons and electrons and neutrons somehow know it happened, and they know, I gotta go now.
Is the notion that space is somehow bending or curving along the lines of the asshole idiot Einstein, who thought that bodies caused a...
So again, asshole idiot, I mean, just totally unnecessary rhetoric. Just, just no value can be gleaned from that kind of useless, grotesque excess. Ugh. It's pathetic.
Warpage of space. And this is like a depression in the fabric of space-time. This is, of course, absurd quantification postulated out of pure conceptual nonsense from quantum physicists.
It really didn't have anything to do with quantum, so that's the joke here. So it's really anti-quantum in so many ways. It's very inconsistent with quantum mechanics, just kind of breaks the whole game in so many ways. So it's idiotic to say that's what it was bred by. It clearly claimed long before Einstein, 1905 or something, the idea was originally inspired in his brains. So it's just a misrepresentation of the origin of the trick. And while I fully agree that this is not a useful metaphor for the inverse square law, which is all it really is, it's just a way of visualizing the inverse square law, and that visualization shouldn't be confused with it just because you can visualize the inverse square law as a well doesn't mean it is a well. I mean, it's just, it's almost cartoonish in the sense that it's that simplistic. Bent space is just a cartoon visualization of the inverse square law. It's not a brilliant idea.
Who are by definition mathematicians. They think in terms of lines of force. Well, a line is a conception, and force...
Let's just understand that Maxwell, although he was an ether believer in her, he's the one who documented the lines of force and the fact that they're the thing creating what you see as field lines. So, Maxwell's the source of the radiant nature of the force perturbation. It's radiant.
Force itself is no different than saying a wave. I love it when people in physics and field theory talk about waves. And you should always say, well, a wave of what, goddammit? A wave of what? Specifically regarding light and magnetism, I'm going to discuss light here in a second, is that all phenomena of light and magnetism, every observable phenomena that we've ever observed of light and magnetism can be logically explained a la Tesla, Steinmetz, and Platonic logic pertaining the aether.
So again, but we're not going to be in on it. Okay, that's a secret club that has that secret knowledge, because obviously Tesla didn't have it. Tesla couldn't draw it. Tesla couldn't make it understood by anybody, whatever he knew. And clearly Steinmetz, there's no contribution anywhere of his notion of what light is. So you have to show me where he had a great theory of photon. So again, this is just jargon. Just talk up the names and the words like there is this secret powerful theory of light that's connected to ether somehow. And he's now, when he actually talks about it, is going to use exactly the same description as conventional physics. It's a wave in two fields. So he's going to keep using the same mechanism. He's relying on their description, which is just so ironic.
Cannot be explained, however, using the irrational concepts and Cartesian atomism of particle quantum theorists who are by definition mathematician. And a mathematician...
So again, this quantum idea being connected to particle is again so ironic when most of quantum mechanics is now obsessed with wave theories. So it's all medium theories. They merely describe the ether as being different ethers. Okay, the magnetic ether, the electric ether, the neutrino ether, the graviton ether. They're every particle they're going to give an ether to now. So they're doing the same thing you're doing. They're looking for things moving in mediums. To call them particleists it's a straw man, plain and simple. And you're straw manning your own belief system, because the fact is they are etherists. They just don't call it one ether.
Fundamentally is somebody who only believes in things that can be counted, divided, square rooted, locked into an equation, but a field has no value by which it can be quantified, much less plugged into equation.
So again, it's just a direct contradiction. He concedes that Maxwell's equations exist and that he has no reason to believe they're completely inaccurate, and they are exactly that. They're exact quantifications of the strength of the force in specific locations and in specific circumstances where charges are mixed together. And they're a quantification of exactly what the implications are. And yet he'll sit there and say that it somehow is not quantifiable when it's clearly been quantified.
All field equations, like I said, are effects over a period of time at a certain vector. And of course these effects are measured in joules or watts, energy, or change of one thing upon another. But they have never, nor science itself, and science today is not real science in the Platonic sense, it is mathematics. And I'm not against mathematics, but...
Well, you just did all this ragging about it, and again, your hero, Steinmetz, was a mathematician, primarily substantive in every way, obsessed with mathematics.
Mathematics cannot come to grips with a noetic principle which has absolutely no Cartesian value. This is fundamentally metaphysics, and I don't mean...
Okay, so this is fundamentally religion. I mean, that's all he's saying. He's saying, no, there is no reality, there's amorphous blah blah, and it does blah blah blah, woo woo, blah blah. And so it's unlike even religion in the sense, no, you can't even think about God. You can't imagine him. He didn't really create us in his image. He's completely unrecognizable, unimaginable. He is multidimensional, blah blah spirit stuff. And therefore we have no access to the universe because the God of the universe is not of us. He is not of this world. He's of the special magical blah 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 world, blah 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 blah. I mean, this is just religion.
Metaphysics in the current connotation, which is New Age crap, but in the absolute Platonic and Pythagorean denotation of something which...
Right, so old age crap. So, yes, I'm against that new age crap. I eat good old 1,000-year-old crap. You know, I don't touch any of that new modern crap. No, I dig up really old shit and eat that. Oh, fuck. New age versus... Yes, let's just go back to that old age crap, you know, where, you know, they fixed your hemorrhoids by sticking a stick up your ass.
Is a substrate to phenomena, to particlism, to atomism, to existential, empirical, psychophysical, and phenomenal principles.
Alright, psychophysical principles. I didn't know I had to read that book before I come to class, you know, the psychophysical principle book. So, you know, you have a reading list that's in English? No, you probably don't. But I probably have to read Guru Hoopu Poopadoo, right? So I can get my psycho principles right before I come to class and listen to the guru. I mean, this is just religion.
Which can be quantized and counted. And this is where science, of course, falls apart. It has no conception of field or field theory, nor the nature of the reality.
Well, it does. It has a whole conception. They're making all kinds of fields. Every day they come up with a new one. As soon as they invent a new particle, they have a new field for it so it can annihilate with things and all that kind of crap. So they have lots of little gimmicks and bells and whistles, just like you. Magical things for things to perpetrate through.
Reality of cosmic mechanics as it pertains to those thereof.
Perpetrate just like they were particles. Yes, they perpetrate in a manner that could be well modeled as being just like little bits moving.
Also, too, going off of what we know about magnetism, well, what I know about magnetism anyway. I said a magnet does not have a field around it. And before you call me a heretic for saying that yet again, you'll have to think about that, and then you'll actually come to a reality. If you've got 5 brain cells and you give it 10 seconds of thought, you'll understand that a magnet does not have a field around it.
Right, so he doesn't think ether could be called a field. So ether isn't like a field. So it isn't like the magnetic field or like the electric field. It's something else that can't be called a field of ether. Okay.
It, by its very nature of field coherency and what we call the Lamore frequency or geomagnetic precession, is field incommensurability, or this field coherency, which is the only thing that defines a magnet, initiates a perturbation of coherency in the shape of a conjugate reality. And the conjugate reality of...
I'm not even going to try. I'm really not even going to try. And to think that these pumpkin heads that watch Ken's videos have any idea what he just said. I mean, if I made a test, you know, and wrote that crap on the test and said, what does that mean? Do you think I'm going to get, if I asked 100 of little Ken's viewers, that any of the answers will be the same? That a single answer will be the same?
Cosmic mechanics, and this is the most fundamental secret of the universe, is we have a toroidal geometry of force and motion, or centrifugal divergence, and we have a centripetal geometry of the hyperboloid, or the hourglass shape of increasing.
Yeah, that's the tornado at the top and bottom, and the hyperboloid is the thing over here. So it's toroid doing this, and the hyperboloid doing that.
Inertia. Force and motion, inertia, and acceleration. Everything is force and motion, inertia, and acceleration. The sub-units of those is capacitance, resistance, permeability, and permittivity.
Yes, stuff moves, hits stuff, the other stuff moves. Yes. So that's all he said right there. Is stuff moves because other stuff moved into it. A perturbation moved at the speed of light, perturbated onto something, the something moved because it got perturbated. That's all he said.
Electric permeability and magnetic, dielectric permeability and magnetic permittivity, excuse me. I should stop staying up till 6 o'clock in the morning every... Light, additionally so, and this is everything modern quantum is based upon. das Lichtwand, or either wave-particle duality, which is the most absurd aspect. If aliens...
Yes, yes, we've already been over that one so many times. I agree, it's a silly thing. They should say, we really should fix that one way or the other, because it sounds kind of silly.
If advanced aliens were to land tomorrow, they would laugh their goddamn asses off on the notion of a wave-particle duality, quote-unquote.
Well, I'd love to throw the previous 3 sentences that you just spoke at the aliens and see what they do. Because I think it's going to sound like a really good joke to them. I think all that crap is going to be really, really funny.
Wave is not a thing. Mother Nature has nothing to do with a duality. A duality is a human concept of something that conflicts with something else. When scientists say that there is a duality in nature, that is like...
Look, a duality isn't that complicated. Lots of things can have dual purpose. This can be a pen or it can be a butt plug. Fortunately, this one hasn't been.
Like saying Mother Nature is like some crazy chick that screams in the mirror about how much she hates herself. There are no dualities in nature. The only duality is within the ignorant minds of mental midget, knuckle-dragging, subhuman morons that we call scientists today.
So all of that total excessive rhetoric, it's just so frickin' stupid. I mean, it's just from this pompous person who produces so little evidence for anything he says. Anything.
No such thing as a wave-particle duality. But light is not something that moves nor is emitted. Light, by its very definition, to apply Platonic logic.
Oh, look, I mean, so he keeps doing this. Light doesn't move. Well, we already know that's what it does. It's not a standing wave. The wave moves to a location, even if you think of it as a wave. It obviously perturbates. What do you think perturbating is? Perturbating is a motion. It has to perturbate there. It has to move there. It's just stupid to say it doesn't perturbate at a speed, because it does.
It is only a concept. We only define light by what it does, but never by what it is. So therefore we are speaking not about...
So this is again kind of bullshit.
You two just got up,
What
fresh
the
out of
hell?
the shower.
How did that happen? An old Snake Plisskenus video. It must be on my index page. It must have gotten accidentally clicked. Anyway. That was kind of a rude awakening. I opened it in a new window, which is really bizarre. I don't have any explanation for that. Anyway, at this moment, I'm sure there is one, though. It's probably not some mystery of the universe. So where was Ken? So yeah, the subject of light. So we know that light is more than one thing. It's radio waves all the way to X-rays. And so he says this illumination. Light is illumination. No, that's not what light's doing in most cases. In most cases, it's converting into heat. And then in cases like X-rays, it goes through things, and we don't really see an illuminated image. We see where it got absorbed and didn't get absorbed, and so it doesn't really have anything to do with illumination. I mean, it's just such a it's kindergarten conversation about what we already know light to be, which is more than just visible light.
Light, but rather illumination. Light doesn't exist from a Platonic logical analysis. Only illumination, and this abstraction of illumination, is only...
So again, we're talking about how something happens at one place and it does something in another place, and he just keeps talking as if there's no need for anything to move between the two things, and yet he's arguing for this ether through which the thing perturbates. So why are we having this conversation like that just automatically? Does he really believe it's instantaneous? He really believes that light just instantaneously pops to the other place?
As meant a disturbance of X, and that X is certainly not space, rather the ether. Light doesn't move, for example. When someone says the speed of light, they're talking about a rate of propagation, and the rate of propagation...
Oh, and that's not semantics. Clearly, conventional science doesn't think photons are solid, Ken. This is, I'll newsflash to you, they think it's a perturbation in a magnetic and electric field. A transverse, as you say, oscillation through fields. So, isn't this preposterous semantics? How is their transverse wave different than your transverse perturbation exactly? Oh, the only difference is yours is in ether and theirs isn't? In ether, it's in some kind of other thing? Aether, it's in Barther or Carther or Darther?
Is a propagation of a transverse field perturbation, in this case the coaxial, whether it be longitudinal, linear polarization or otherwise, of a transverse coaxial circuit, which is light, has transverse electromagnetic longitudinal pulse perturbations along the dielectric line of emission.
So that all is brilliant, right? So all he's saying is it's a thing going generally straight that is waving this way and this way at the same time in two different geometries of the ether.
Something that actually has a transverse, a spatial component, and this of course is frequency or wavelength, must fall within rate of propagation of the limit of perturbation of the fundamental ether itself. And this
So he just said some junk, and he's clearly implying something like there was some sort of, it depends on, when we know that it doesn't matter what frequency the light is, it travels exactly the same speed. So again, he's just using jargon. He's not paying any attention to what he's saying. It all travels the same. It's not frequency dependent in any way. He implied that speed was dependent on frequency. There's no speed dependent on frequency.
of course is what we call c, or the speed of light, but it's not not a speed at all, rather a rate of propagation. All the things that scientists have never been able to explain.
So anyway, so that's the kind of distinction these Ken heroes, these Ken followings, that they think that's an important distinction. Rate of propagation isn't speed of light. I mean, please. I mean, this is just it's. The aliens would laugh at that.
Like how light is able to not break the law of conservation of energy by speeding up after it leaves glass. See, light slows down as it enters glass, but it doesn't slow down. This is a dielectric permittivity issue.
It doesn't slow down, yet it does. See, again, this is just such nonsense. He says it slows down, but then he says it doesn't slow down, but then he uses the fact that it slowed down to say somehow it has to speed up. If it didn't really slow down, then it doesn't need to speed up. Right?
Where the capacitance of the glass slows the light down, but it doesn't slow down. But the notion that it somehow speeds back up again, like...
So he just says it doesn't slow down, but the notion that it speeds up again. Well, why does it need to speed up again if it didn't slow down? How can you say shit like this? You're contradicting yourself in your own sentences. Like 2 words away, you contradict the very thing you just said.
It steps on the gas pedal, of course, would break the law of conservation, because modern science is atomistic by its very...
Yeah, well, and modern science has explanations for that you don't consider. So I'm just saying it's just clearly the light doesn't actually slow down as you stated, and therefore it doesn't have to actually speed up. It just takes a longer path through the medium.
Nature, and you cannot explain light speeding back up again after it leaves glass by using an atomistic view of reality.
Right, and they don't do that because they don't believe the light photons actually slow down. They were absorbed by the material, and they are in the material, and then they're released by the material. And the process of moving through the material was not a straight line. You think that light is clear because you think light doesn't hit any of the atoms in the glass. You think glass is clear because it's somehow the light goes right through it. But everybody who knows any physics knows the glass is a rather dense material with lots of atoms in it, and it's not likely to be that the light goes through without hitting anything. It's in fact very likely that the light's going to hit something, especially considering glass is an insulator.
As espoused by modern science, who are by definition mathematicians and goddamn atomists. However, all phenomena of light And there is no way for it.
Well, he keeps complaining about how much money he's making, and you really don't have to say "goddamn" or "asshole." See, I don't care because I don't have any ads on my shit. But you know, they're not. Those are just catchwords. I'm just giving you some advice. If you want to make more money, don't call people assholes, and don't say bunt muncher or something. Just avoid that kind of conversation. Call them dirty, stinking stinkers.
Critical duality. Explaining that is rather simple. Save for another place and time, which I've actually already explained in other videos, can only be explained by the aether. Absolutely everything can be explained by Maxwellian tests.
Yeah, Maxwellian. So again, he's resorting to Maxwellian, and Maxwell believed in an ether, but there's no ether in any of his mathematics. He wanted there to be an ether, but that's not what he saw when he did the math. So I don't know what you're exactly saying here. Let's not say it that. I won't say it that draconianly. Certainly he could have still imagined that it was perturbations in the field. He didn't have any accounting for why the force is radial. He just conceded that's what it is. Whether it's a perturbation or a particle, it's radial.
Tesla, Faraday, and the Platonic aether. You cannot explain instantaneous action at a distance, the speeding up of light, quote unquote.
Well, again, why do I have to explain instantaneous action at a distance when I can't find it anywhere in the real universe? So this Platonic, the universe of 1,000 years ago, you think they believed in, they could just materialize thousands of miles away? I think they kind of knew they had to walk there or get on a horse or something. They couldn't just poof.
As it leaves, there's 1,000 things. I've got a list of like nearly 50 really important ones. Can never be explained by atomistic.
Well, why don't you take that list and do a video with that list? That would be a hell of a lot more interesting than this, big pile of smelly jargon.
Views of the nature of cosmic mechanics as it pertains to the nature and the composition, if you want to say composition, of light. It's absolutely impossible. So all phenomena of light can only be explained logically via Platonic test.
Again, so it can't be explained, yet there's lots of other explanations that are just as viable as your kooky explanation, and in a sense they're more viable because at least there's more evidence defending them than what you're providing. So just keep making declarations that your God is God, although you demonstrate in no way whatsoever beyond stating it how your God is more gaudy.
Steinmetz and aether models of the universe. It can never be explained via moving particles or waves, and waves are not things. Force is not a thing either.
Alright, so the big distinction in here is that he doesn't believe in waves, he believes in perturbation. So, okay. So that's the big semantic crime of conventional physics, is they, instead of using the word perturbation, they've been using the word wave. And they have to learn how to use perturbation. They need to do the perturbation.
Shadow is not a thing. A shadow is a privation and absence of light. These are human abstractions and conceptions. Waves do not exist. Force does not exist. Force...
It's just stupid. I mean, yes, there's an absence of my fist in your face right now. And that could be contrast against the existence of a fist in your face right now. It's just... just doesn't mean anything. A privation of fist in your face. Yes, that's what you have now. A privation of fist in your face.
Is said of something else. A shadow, a wave, force, countless other things. The notion that light is moving or has a speed. This is all ridiculous. Light by itself is only a concept.
Light by itself is only a concept. Yeah, except one that's just all around us all the time, doing things. I mean, it's clearly a concept that can actually move objects, heat objects. It can do lots of things. So this idea that it's just a concept, no, it's a perfectly well recognized existent thing causing effects. And your explanation of its function or cause is the thing that's vacuous and immaterial.
It is light with the the lack of energy unapplied to a light bulb or a laser or anything for that matter. We only speak of light in the sense of the release or perturbation of a field perturbation, and this we're referring to illumination, but light itself is not a thing. Light is fundamentally, of course, a field perturbation or an ether perturbation.
Yeah, then it is kind of curious the way it does take actual energy to make it go. You know, that it consumes things. The sun is consumed producing light. It somehow gets lighter by producing light. Curious.
Is a disturbance in the hysteresis of the ether. The hysteresis of the ether is something you should certainly Google. You find a lot of abstruse information on that. Not a lot of it incredibly enlightening, but history.
Abstruse. So that's what I want. I want abstruse information. It's like saying you want brain herpes. Why do I want abstruse information? I don't think that's very helpful. You're enough of a source of abstruse gobbledygook. I don't need to get any extra.
The hysteresis of the ether is a fundamentally super important concept that is kind of beyond the ken of most people to wrap their brains around, but that's all light is, but light doesn't exist. We only know light by what it does, not by what it is. That would be like Bob speaking about...
Yes, well, everything is what it does, essentially. Okay, so if you don't think the does part is the is part, I does think, I does piss, I does poo, I does lots of things, and when you add up all the things I does, you're pretty much defined my isness. That is what I is. I is what I does. I think somebody 1,000 years ago might have said that.
Bob. Well, we only know Bob if he's walking. You know, if Bob stops walking and he just stands there, then Bob completely vanishes from the cosmos, wholly and utterly.
That's your theory. Yeah. Rational physics, like I say, even conventional physics, I think, understands that photons don't stop. They are always moving. And when they're in your camera, for example, and you think you can dump them out, well, you can't dump them out because the photon, the energy of the photon, has actually moved through your camera and created heat inside of it. That's why it got warm, and all kinds of other manifestations. And some of those photons that went in might even pop out of your LCD screen. Who knows? But they're still moving. They never stop.
It's like we only know Bob if he's doing something. If Bob is just standing there, he vanishes from existence, poof, you know, like a fart in the wind, right? Well, that would be ridiculous, but that is what we think that what light is. And we talk about light, but we're never talking about light. We're talking about...
Nobody thinks that. So again, he's saying that that's what they think happens, and nobody I know of, no physicist I know of, thinks that's what photons do. That they just die. They know they're converted. So the frequency can change or something else can change, but the energy itself doesn't die. I think most of them get that if they're pressed.
The attribute of a force vector of a coaxial circuit of an ether perturbation, which we call light, but which is not light, but actually illumination. The conjugate nature of reality...
So if they say illumination, it's okay. So if I say X-ray illumination, or radio wave illumination, then I'm being accurate. I don't think so.
Torus and the hyperboloid, which defines force and motion, inertia, and acceleration, can only be logically explained using Platonic retroduction thinking methodologies to understand the cosmic mechanics that fundamentally govern the universe. And like I said, a magnet does not have a field. Everything we think we understand about magnetism is based upon thousands of year-old observations of magnetite and other...
Well, they have much more modern observations, actually, so it's not all based on 1,000-year-old observations. They have new modern observations, Ken.
Ferromagnetically coherent objects that have been naturally discovered. Of course, we create them now, use our cell phones and computers and everything else, but there's no such thing as magnetic attraction or no such thing as magnetic repulsion. A magnet doesn't have a field.
It has ether that's being perturbated, which is exactly the same thing in every respect. So, again, this is just jargon.
All of these absurdities are will soon vanish, if humanity is allowed to at least intellectually evolve a little bit more without destroying itself, which is probably very unlikely.
So he keeps preaching 1,000-year-old methods of living, and the 1,000-year-old methods of living, which were have a war every 15 minutes, as the way to go, and it was, that's why they're artifacts, dead civilizations, ruined, and we should somehow mimic their behavior. No, we should probably step past that crap.
But these things don't exist. These are reifications of absurdities as espoused by, less than illuminated minds. And by that I mean atomists and materialists who are mathematicians by definition, who call
just more crap accusations that have just no meaning. Again, Steinmetz was a mathematician, so again, just meaningless mush.
themselves scientists. But to be assured, these are not scientists at all. These are people that only count things, they only believe in things, and they can count.
They're, yes, like you, they don't rely enough on evidence, and instead just let their imagination go wild and come up with all kinds of toroidal tornadoes and hyperbordal vacuum suckers and all kinds of bullshit fantasy objects to define our reality.
And for them to even think that they have any insight into field theory or cosmic mechanics, which cannot be quantized, is of course where they completely screw up the picture and model of the universe.
Clearly it can be quantized. He's calling them perturbations, like they're real perturbations, coaxial perturbations even, transverse and reverse, whatever. He's clearly acknowledging they're a thing that can be identified as a thing. He says they move without moving, which is kind of silly, but I don't know. I mean,
Verse that they espouse to others. We live in a cult of atomism. The Indians would call it the Kali Yuga, but it's an era of intellectual degradation.
Right, and they're the ones shitting on a rock. I have a nice porcelain toilet. So, yeah, fuck you.
And corruption, where, as Nikola Tesla said, one is able to think deeply, yet not clearly. One may be truly insane. What was the exact...
Yes, it's a terrible waste to have a mind. Quoting Dan Quayle. You're right up there, Ken.
Quote, someone's going to give it to me, I can't remember the exact quote from Tesla. He's basically saying you'd be a deep thinker, yet, a total fucking nut job. You have to be able to think clearly to actually think accurately.
Yes, he thought everybody else was insane, and he was the only sane one. And he spent his whole life living in a hotel room. Right. Okay. Sure. And dressed very nicely.
I forget the exact quote from Tesla. It escapes you right now. Someone will quote it for me. I should remember all my Tesla quotes, but that one slipped my mind. But I think you got the gist of it. Lux e Veritas. If you like these videos, you can always click the link below. I'm working on my book, the 4th edition, and which is not out.
Yeah, I don't know why you keep talking about something you don't do. So you've been doing that for a year now. I mean, a year of, the book is coming out, the next edition, blah, blah, blah. Why would people read your 3rd edition if you're promoting the idea that there's going to be a new, updated version? It seems kind of silly. Oh, here, I'm working on my new book, but read my old one instead. Doesn't make any sense, Ken. I think you perturbated there. Alright, anyway, so, again, you saw, right? There's just nothing here. There's no physics in these videos. There's just a bunch of insults and pretensive, what's the word? Patronizing bullshit. This is the stuff you expect from preachers, not somebody who thinks they're doing science. Serious thinkers don't resort to this kind of bullshit. Anyway, till next time and such, so forth and whatnot. I'm pretty sure. So anyway, yeah, I'll wait. I won't do another video until he actually does one of his silly demonstrations or something. I mean, you've heard all the rhetoric now, so the rhetoric videos are just so useless, so I won't bother with those.